You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to episode 22 of Ethnocynology. I'm your host, David Ian Howe, and I'm here with my good friend, North02. We're going to talk about the old copper culture today, which is something I know absolutely nothing about, but it's something you clearly have a passion for, and I'm just going to let you spill. What is the old copper culture?
All right, so the old copper culture, we discovered it, only in the past few hundred years. Like when the Europeans showed up to the region, especially like the French was the first to show up to, the Great Lakes region, they did not encounter much copper artifacts. And if they did, it was just maybe jewelry, maybe someone was wearing an earring or a nose ring or something, but they were not using any copper tools at all. So, they were just using stone tools, and the French were just like, okay, so these people are just, hunter-gatherer kind of type people who use stone tools and stuff. But then only, about 100 years later, we started finding all these copper artifacts, and we started finding all these copper mines. So what's really important to understand about the old copper culture, in Michigan and parts of northern Minnesota and even Ontario have the most pure copper deposits in the world. It's called native copper. And it literally, I found a piece of it, and me and David just hammered it into a fishing hook, just with a heat source. It's just that pure that it's like, you can just turn it into a tool within just a few hours, or even less time, even 20 minutes. So this is really important to understand that the region is just absolutely full of this pure copper. And this attracted a lot of miners in the 1800s, of course, because copper is a pretty valuable resource. And so all these miners had been at like European mining centers like Cornwall, and they were really experienced with like getting copper ore, not like native copper. But they showed up and they just kept finding these little pits. They're about, maybe 10 feet deep on average, maybe 10 feet wide. And they're just these little shallow depressions, but they kept finding literally thousands of them all over Michigan and also Isle Royale, which is this big island in Lake Superior that's like 50 miles long. And they were just blown away. They were like, who made these? Because the people they encountered, the natives were not really using copper like not for tools, just, ornamentation. So they were like, who was here before? And of course, they just jumped to conspiracy theories like there was a lost tribe of Israelites or something that made it to their region. But it was a real mystery, back in the day, but it just kind of died down. Nobody outside of the region really knows anything about it. So that's why I'm trying to make this. So I'm making a documentary that's coming out. It will be out by the time this is out. And just a bunch of supporting content, trying to make this like a common knowledge thing.
Yeah. And I guess for the listeners who I have dog interested people and rock interested people, what exactly is copper?
Copper?
Yeah. I know it's a metal, but there's like the Copper Age or the Bronze Age. It's Copper Age, Bronze Age, then Iron Age. Why would copper be the first thing people used before bronze and all that?
So it's different in different areas. So, copper, just in the most basic sense, obviously it's a metal. And it's a pretty soft metal, but when you cold hammer it, which means you just literally hammer it when it's cold, it compresses it and it makes it way harder. So I have a copper axe right here, and I can literally cut down a tree with it. And it's a lot harder than people would usually imagine, because they usually only encounter copper as wires or like annealed versions of copper that are really soft. But so copper was the first metal really smelted anywhere in the world, and that happened in the Near East and Southern Europe. And that's just because I think it's a lower temperature than iron to smelt, and it's really useful. Like lead, you can melt lead really easily, but lead can't hold an edge, even if it's cold hammered. So in Europe, I don't know too much about Europe and Near Eastern archaeology, but I know that the Copper Age started to appear the earliest, maybe 7,000 years ago. They started smelting ore into tools. And it's a big advantage over stone in some ways, because it can be made thinner, a lot thinner without being fragile, because copper, it doesn't crack. Really, it can crack. It doesn't usually. And also it's really malleable, which is nice for making complex artifacts, and you can cast and stuff. And you can recycle it too. If you have a copper tool that's all damaged and old, you just melt it down and make another one, So it has a lot of advantages over stone. But what was your question? Go back to your question. I forgot it already.
Yeah, just what is copper, I guess, as a metal? But you kind of answered it. Do you think they were cold hammering it first and used it like kind of like they approached it like they would lithics, or did they throw it in a fire and realize it melted? Or like, how do you think that came about?
Yeah, so I believe the oldest artifact of copper ever found that is like securely dated is an 8,700-year-old bead from probably Turkey. I would have to check up on it again, but yeah, in the Near East. And it was just like the old copper culture. They just found a piece of pure copper and they just hammered it out into a little bead. So yeah, intuitively, you can just hammer copper into shapes. It's a lot easier than going through the process of smelting it. And you know how they discovered how to smelt copper ore? I don't know. They probably were experimenting with pigments and ceramics is probably what it was. Because if you're doing ceramics, you can get to those really high temperatures to where you would be able to smelt it out. Yeah. But obviously, the old copper culture, I guess not obviously for people who don't know, they never casted or smelted copper at all, as far as we know. They just did it out of the bedrock and then cold hammered it into all sorts of crazy things. So to get some intrigue, I might as well show. This is based off of a real artifact. The handle is, I created the handle, but this is a real artifact that was found in Ontario. It's a 21-inch long copper. What else are you going to call it besides a sword?
Sword. Yeah.
A lot of people in the old copper culture kind of community don't like to call it that. They just call it a blade. But like, look at this thing. I mean, compared to my arm, it's just like, this is a sword.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a gladius-sized sword.
Even like European, like medieval times, this is a short sword at least.
Yeah.
So yeah, they made crazy things out of it, including, this is another reconstruction. What this object was used for, we don't necessarily know, but yeah, they made really complex objects and they did it all with cold hammering, which is absolutely insane that you could make. I casted this because it was way easier than doing it with the cold hammering techniques. But yeah, there is thousands and thousands of these artifacts they found in the region, and you'd be blown away by some of them. Like, it's absolutely wild, the just diversity of tools they made with copper.
So that Batman-looking axe there was found in North America?
Yeah, it was found the real artifact was found in Wisconsin, I think. It's in I think it might be in the Milwaukee Museum or something like that. But there's, you know what a banner stone is, right?
Let's say I don't.
I mean, it's it's a very common object in like the Archaic in North America. And what it is, just a perforated stone. So a stone with a hole in it. And again, we don't really know exactly what they used them for. There's two main theories, really, is that they used them on like bow drills, it's like a weight to keep it moving. And then the other idea is that they were in the center of a spear thrower or an atlatl or atlatl. And that's what this reconstruction is. It's a spear thrower, and it has a copper hook and the banner stone in the middle. But yeah, they're some of the most complex artifacts we find in like North American archaeology, because they just really spent a lot of time to make them. It's like it was some cultural thing. So basically the old copper culture probably encountered some of those artifacts coming from I think it's more like the South and more Eastern woodlands. And they were like, well, let's just make one out of copper because we can do that. So that might have been, who knows though, right? We know so little about the artifact itself.
When I was hanging out with Donnie Dust one time, he was telling me with his atlatl, like when he's out in the wilderness surviving or whatever, like atlatls with hooks on the end, you can use to like get into burrows to like pull rabbits out or, gophers or whatever's in there. That's why he prefers the hook. But also you can use like basically the flat board of the atlatl if it's flat as a, hearth board for a fire spindle, or you can use the end of it as a fire spindle itself. So I'm wondering if that thing has like a little atlatl hook on the end of it. Maybe it was like a dual purpose atlatl and axe or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I
too heavy.
That banner stones on atlatls could have been used as like a melee weapon, possibly too. But a lot of them are so delicate that like it doesn't. Right. I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure. I know at least boomeras from Australia had a bunch of uses. Like they're super multi-purpose. They even hafted little stones in the handle so they could do like woodworking with the woomera, which is just wild. So yeah, I assume they were like a very multi-use weapon. Yeah.
So this documentary that it'll probably be out before this episode comes out for sure, but what's your central theme of it, or like what's the focus of it?
The central theme is just like 100 different facts about the old copper culture that will all blow your mind because no one has any idea it even exists. And I mean, I guess I might as well just get into this.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting facts about it is it's really old. Like it probably appeared right at the end of the last ice age in a way. At least the oldest copper artifacts in the region were probably made right when people got to the region, which would have been like Clovis, literally 13,000 years ago. So it probably represents the earliest metal use, at least metal use for tools in the entire world, which is absolutely crazy. But I say probably because the oldest actual dated artifact we have is from a conical point. So they made a lot of these points right here, just like this. And it's just a copper cone, really. Copper has a really unique property of when it oxidizes, it releases, I don't know, these specific chemicals that are just really good at preserving like organic material. From these conical points, my friend David actually he was in on the study, and they dated material from inside of the conicals, and they found the earliest date of 8,500 years ago. So if you remember, right, that's 200 years later than the earliest copper artifacts ever dated, supposedly in the Near East. So it's just barely not as old as the oldest one from the Near East, but there's so many more artifacts that need to be dated from the region. And I almost guarantee that they'll find more evidence. And that's because we have sediment core data, which proves copper was being mined as far back as 9,500 years ago. So that's why I say that this culture probably appeared right when people got to the region. At least they started working copper, because copper's everywhere.
Okay, so that was my next question. Do you think in that area is the copper ore just exposed all over the place? It's something that caught their eye?
Yeah, I mean, we found a piece. We were just looking for like lithics or anything in this like glacial deposit that we were walking around because we were camping, and we literally just found a little piece of copper. Like it's that, and that's called float copper. It's just copper that the glaciers basically ripped away and just deposited everywhere. So it's all over the region, and it's super easy to turn into something. So
interesting. And when you found it, I assume it's like green, like super weathered green, and stuff.
Yeah.
And what's the process of? Do you use vinegar or something to clean the green off, or like when you smelt it, does it turn back to like copper colored?
So we just heated it up. We just had a little burner, but they would have used, a campfire, and we heated it up and then just quenched it. And immediately that green color just went away. And it's just the pure metal basically. Then, I mean, it has a little bit of patina on it, but it's just the metal. And then from there it gets, once you quench it, it anneals it. So it's really soft. And then you just do that process 9 or 10 times, and then you have whatever artifact you're going for.
And obviously I've seen you posted on Instagram, and you've sent me countless pictures now, but you've made like a little smelting thing in your yard, right?
Yeah, I have I guess a furnace, I guess you'd call it. Yeah.
Tell me about that.
It's pretty fun. I mean, it's a lot of work to cast copper. I honestly prefer the old copper culture methods where you just get a piece of copper and then you hammer it out into a shape, because, smelting and casting is just a whole process. Like you have to set up the sand mold, and it's just so much work that it makes complete sense why they never felt the need to waste that much energy and time and materials to create something they could have just as easily made with a campfire.
Yeah. And you need big pieces of wood and logs, like from cutting trees down and stuff, to fuel that furnace, I imagine. So it's just a lot of energy.
Yeah.
Huh. So you said sand molds. Is that what they would have used in the old world at first?
Yeah. I believe they actually used like open stone molds. So they would have just like chiseled out the shape of an axe into a stone and then poured the metal in. I think that's like some of the earliest copper smelting we have evidence for. Like that's probably how like Utsi the Iceman's axe was made.
Right. I meant to ask you about Utsi, but I will come back to that question right after this commercial break. We'll be right back. And we're back with episode 22 of Ethnocynology, talking with North02, friend of the channel, friend of the APN. I know for a fact that Utsi had lots of things on him when he died, including like fire bundles and his little drape bedroll thing, but he had a copper axe. Can you tell me about that, and how do you think that was made?
So that axe was definitely cast, but how they would have done it back in the day is they would cast the axe, and then since it's soft after you cast it, you have to hammer it on like every side to make it really hard. And I've made the same like Utsi axes. I've made a bunch of them before, and they're nice little axes. I mean, it's a tiny little axe head, And it really puts into perspective like old world copper use versus what we see in like Michigan and stuff. Because in the old world, if you find like 3 pieces of copper or bronze, it's like labeled like a metal rich site, which is hilarious because you can go, I mean, I don't want to tell people to do this, but you can go to almost any lake in central Wisconsin and metal detect for 30 minutes and you'll find, 10, 15 pieces of copper that were artifacts or worked by people. So it's just really interesting to contrast like the old world metal use during the Chalcolithic versus like the old copper culture, and really puts it into perspective.
Yeah. Can you explain what the Chalcolithic is? That I was going to bring that up earlier, but I figured I'll let you explain it.
Yeah. So when like copper technology first appeared in the old world, they were still using stone tools as well. And that was in America too. Like stone is really useful for a lot of things. And even if metal's around, chances are it's going to be kind of scarce. And like stone is also much better at cutting. It's sharper and harder generally. So the Chalcolithic in Europe and the old world was like copper tools were making it into the region and they were starting to use them, but they're also still using stone tools. And by this time, they're like agriculture was fully, at least in Italy and most of Europe and a lot of the world. And it was like a highly developed time already. It was just that like metal use was still just diffusing throughout the area because there's really not that much. There wasn't that much copper and tin available just in the old world, Europe and Near East. Like there's not too much of it to go around. So not everybody could have copper and this and that. And obviously the wealthy people were hoarding it by that time as well.
Sure. What do you think, we can focus on the new world here in a few, but in the old world, what do you think made people shift to bronze? Because bronze is copper and tin together, right?
Yeah, bronze is way harder than copper. You just add 10% tin was like the classic 10 to 12%, I believe, is what most like Bronze Age artifacts are. And just that little 10% makes it like, I have the statistics somewhere, but it makes it probably 30, 40% harder. I'm not exactly sure. And it just makes it hold an edge way better. It doesn't bend as much. And it's just way better for tools, basically.
Was that just through experimentation of melting different metals, you think? And then they realized this worked better? I
believe like some copper sources, like you melt them down and they have arsenic in it. And that way you make an arsenic bronze, which is harder, but it's also extremely toxic. So they would have made bronze probably by accident. And that also happened in South America as well.
Okay. Interesting. I didn't even know they did that there. So what was that about? Or what do you know about that? South America?
Oh yeah. They had bronze down there for a long time. I mean, they had like a bunch of different kinds of bronzes. I'm still just learning about it, but apparently they were obsessed with bells, at least in Mesoamerica, I believe. And like they would alter the different levels of tin and arsenic and copper to like make specific bells that sounded like specific animals and things. It was like just like a part of they believe the noise of a bell had to do with like God or their religion. I'm not super read up on it.
Sure.
Yeah. So copper use and bronze use at least was highly sophisticated down there. They were casting pretty, crazy things, and they had a lot of metal, which is just a lot of people don't know that, but yeah.
Yeah. So I know when the Spanish got to Mexico, they obviously were looking for gold in Peru as well, but the Mexica had tons of like, I think gold, and it was like cold hammered into, different jewelry and things like that. Were they using copper and bronze as well?
Yeah. I know that they were called axe monies. I don't know if you've heard of them. They were these little pieces of, I think they could be copper or bronze, and they were shaped like little axe heads, but they were used as a currency. And I assume it's because you could actually just turn it into an axe if you wanted to. So that's why it had like an inherent like utilitarian value, but it was also valuable because it was shiny and made of, a rare material. But I know that was all over Mesoamerica by the time the Spanish showed up. So.
Yeah. And I had a friend ask me too, like, it's not a historian or archaeologist at all, but he was like, why is gold so universally coveted? Or, like, why is it so valuable to everyone? And I guess kind of you just said it, like it's shiny and it's like malleable, I guess.
Yeah, I'd say it's shiny, it's rare, and it's malleable. So not everyone else can have a bunch of it. And it's fairly easy to make really cool things out of it because it's so soft.
Mm-hmm.
And we're humans. So we're going to, we're going to put value on things and we're going to keep it away from other people,
Yeah, especially ones that are rare and cool. And you had told me in the other pod that we did, I'll link that here, that there was like some Spanish story of like them trading axes with the natives in the Caribbean. Can you talk about that again?
Yeah, I read up on that, like the actual account of it. And man, I forget the guy's name, the explorer's name, but he had gone to mainland Mexico. I think he was the first or one of the first people there on the Yucatan. They got in a battle and they had won, but then they were peaceful with the people. And they saw that this one guy had this little axe hanging from his neck, this really shiny little gold axe. And they were like, we want that. So they traded with them glass beads and everything they could, all this clothing. So they they had 600 of them. And what they were, those axe monies. And they were just these really shiny, pieces of metal. And then so they put them in a chest and they put them on their boat and they didn't even touch them. They were because they just thought they made away with so much money. And they got back to, Cuba and they went to the other, the hub where I guess they were all staying. And they opened up their chest. And by the time they opened it up, I mean, the copper looked like this because it wasn't gold, it was copper, and it completely tarnished by the time they got there. So what the guy was wearing probably looked something like this. It would be a really bright, shiny, because the guy probably polished it every day. It was a valuable item. But by the time they got the port, it would have looked like this. So clearly it wasn't gold. And apparently the guy never heard the end of it from the other explorers, which is just pretty hilarious.
Yeah.
You thought that was gold. You brought back a bunch of copper, bro.
That is pretty funny. Okay. So what are some other examples of copper in the Americas that we might not know about?
Well, I know the Inuit had access to, and in the Southwest, they had access to some native copper as well. And they made harpoons out of it and a bunch of other stuff and knives and stuff way before European contact. I'm not sure about the Southwest. I know some Mississippian cultures had copper. And a lot of that actually did come from Lake Superior region. I believe it was traded all the way down there, which makes sense. It's on the Mississippi, I guess. But yeah, I mean, the Great Lakes area really has so much copper up there. And it's just really unprecedented, the deposits they have there. And that's why there was a huge copper boom there, in the 1800s. And that's where they found all those ancient mines, some of them 60 feet deep.
Wow. And then you're just digging that with, I guess, digging sticks and flint picks, I guess.
Yeah, they had hammerstones. We actually found a real one when we were looking at mines. It's in the documentary, but we were looking at these little pit mines and we were walking along and my buddy kicked over a rock and my other buddy came and passed by it and he looked down and it had a groove along the outside. So it was an actual grooved hammerstone. And they find hundreds of these in pits all around the area. But to find one just sitting on the side of the trail was pretty surreal.
Yeah, that is wild. I wouldn't even, I guess a grooved stone I would have noticed. Copper tools I might not have noticed, but yeah. So you said there was a little island that they went to where they found all these copper tools in the Great Lakes. How would they have gotten there? How'd they figure that out?
Yeah, so Isle Royale it's a pretty big island. I haven't been there myself. I've seen it from the coast, but it's 50 miles long and it's this long, skinny island. And it formed in this crazy geology way. I can't even pretend like I can explain it. But it's full of copper, just like the Keweenaw Peninsula. It's it was like a dome, like a volcanic dome. So one side of it is on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and Isle Royale is another side of it. And it's just absolutely full of copper. And if you know anything about Lake Superior, even in the middle of the summer, it will be super cold. It's hard to swim in there in the summer. You could easily die of hypothermia sometimes when you're on the coast. So it's a very frigid place and it's hard to get out there and to spend time out there. That's why I didn't end up going. But to get a group of hunter gatherers to get and there's not a lot of food on the island. There's moose now and there's probably some deer and there's wolves. It's you're not going to get 30 people to survive there for more than a week or so before you hunted out that whole side of the island, Mm-hmm. So, and they found just thousands and thousands of mines there, ancient mines, pits, individual pits. And just the organization it would have taken to get all that food, get all your guys, situated and ready to go out there, go there, spend weeks or even months mining copper, and then bring all that copper back to the mainland because they didn't stay there. The archaeologists have hardly found any evidence of like habitation. They barely find any copper artifacts there. Like they'll find a knife or a chisel once in a while, but they seem to have taken everything back to the mainland where they'd actually, use it. So just the fact that they did all of that, even over 9,000 years ago, and some of the dating suggests, probably more like 5,000 to 7,000 years. But it's just wild that they would have gotten all those people together, gotten all the supplies necessary to go spend like maybe even most of the summer mining copper. And then they'd come back to the mainland Minnesota or Ontario to go use it. It's just something you wouldn't expect for hunter-gatherer populations who don't have agriculture. They probably lived off a lot of wild game and maybe wild rice, I guess, is in the region. But other than that, it's pretty baffling.
Okay. And with that, we'll take another quick commercial break and we'll be right back. And we're back with episode 22 of Ethnocynology with North02. In the interim, you had mentioned something about the Agate Basin site in copper. Can you talk about that?
So if you're familiar with like early or Paleoindian cultures in the Americas, the Agate Basin culture was like a widespread culture across the plains where they made these big, this is a Clovis point, but it was kind of like this without the base. They made these big, long, like lancelet projectiles that, they probably would have used for throwing at bison and elk and other big animals like that. They were pretty stereotypical, like late Paleoindian culture, post Clovis. So they were still, hunting a lot of large game, but all the mammoths were gone and a lot of other megafaunal species. But it's interesting because we find a lot of artifacts from the old copper culture that look very similar to Agate Basin points. And this actually lines up with the timing of the culture too, because, Agate Basin appeared about 10,500 years ago, and I think survived until maybe 8,000 years ago before they stopped making those points. And that coincidentally is right when the old copper culture appears around probably 9,500 years ago is what the earliest like lead lake sediment cores suggest. So basically the connection is that people from the Agate Basin culture may have came over with their, this is how we make a point. And then they encountered people using copper, or maybe they started up the tradition themselves and they started making, points that looked exactly like their other projectiles did, but out of copper instead of stone.
It's kind of like how the Danish dagger is a thing. Like
No, it's exactly like that.
Huh. That's a good point. I guess for the audience that might not be aware, I'll put a picture here, but Danish daggers are like the most complicated and like, I would say like most challenging piece of flint knapping art you can make, especially with the stitching on the handle, but it's meant to look like the leather stitching going across it or whatever. But those are they're made out of flint at a time when they already had metallurgy. So it was like the prowess of flint knappers to be like, I can do that in stone. I can put a video of someone making that here too. Yeah, that is cool. I didn't really think about the Agate Basin connection there. That's neat too.
And it's probably fake. I don't know. Nobody's been able to tell me if it's like a certified fake or if it could be real, but there's a point that looks like a Clovis point, exactly like one, made out of copper. I've only found the image. I don't know anything about it, so it probably is a hoax. But it certainly is possible that, Clovis culture was in the same region and they would have, 100% encountered copper. So what are the odds that they picked up a piece and were like, hey, let's make a little fluted copper point? I think it's plausible. We know the Clovis culture liked quartz and like weird materials. They like sought after like really high quality stone. So I think they may have been some of the first people to work copper. It's possible.
Yeah, I'd never heard that either. I'll have to check that out. I'm wondering too, if even in the old world too, if it seems to appear around the same time, the first instances of copper use, it's like with the melting snow of the end of the Pleistocene, it's like the green stone is like sticking out more to them or something. I don't know. Why do you think it would be right around that time?
Well, in North America, it's just because a lot of the copper would have been covered. So, if pre-Clovis populations were living there for however long, the copper would have mostly been covered by glaciers. So you might have found some pieces in like as far south as like Kansas where the glaciers weren't, because it has carried it before in previous like glaciations. And it wasn't until after the glaciers melted that these hunter-gatherer populations would have been able to like come into contact with a lot of it, and it would have been plentiful. And so I think that's how it probably worked out. And Eurasia was different because they don't have as much native copper. So they would have seen that like malachite and other copper ores, and they probably used them as pigments. So we find like malachite piles of pigment piles in sites like over 11,000 years old, maybe even older. I think it's like even like by Göbekli Tepe, like we find that they were using those pigments, but they weren't smelting them. So it probably wasn't until they like really started doing pottery that they would have discovered that you can smelt the green powder into metal, you know.
Interesting. Okay. And again, I only know of malachite through Skyrim because you find so much refined malachite. Yeah. So they're using like the green powder. Okay. That would make sense too. I've never really seen that. And you said in this doc that you interviewed some like experts and stuff like that too?
Yeah. So David Pompiani, he's a researcher. He's a geologist who did a lot of these studies on radiocarbon dating and also the lake sediment core analysis, which is one of the biggest components to like the story of the old copper culture, because that's how we can figure out when they first started mining. And what he's discovered is that there's probably two major mining periods, mining activity between 9,500 to 8,000 years ago. They were mining a lot. And then they seem to have, taken a break, or who knows what happened. And then they started up again around 7,000 to 5,000 years ago was another big activity pile. And then after that, literally nothing. There's no lead in the lake sediment cores for another 5,000 years. So whatever happened, I don't know. Apparently there was a drought that started 5,300 years ago in the region, which affected inland lake levels and probably the whole environment. So the hypothesis is probably that it was environmental stress and maybe social breakdown. And, after a couple of generations, they just kind of forgot or decided like, we don't need to go do that. That's a lot of work. Let's just use stone tools and hunt what we can, because that's just, or they just forgot, or who knows. It's a mystery. We really don't know, but they stopped mining copper. They kept using it, probably the old tools they'd found, or just pieces of float copper you can find anywhere. So,
yeah. Okay, because that was my next question to that too, is like, why would they have stopped using it? Because it seems in the old world, they, moved on to bronze and then iron and all that. And in the new world, they don't seem to have, for some reason. I guess they just didn't need to. But why do you think copper just didn't spread or,
Well,
disappeared?
Another hypothesis about it is that right when the copper started, after mining stopped and the copper artifacts get more rare, they find that the copper artifacts only get kind of more complex once the mining stops. So they still have copper tools, but they start turning them into more like symbolic objects, like masks and a lot more jewelry and just like weird little trinkets and stuff, instead of these huge tools that they use for, cutting down trees and hunting animals and, fighting bear or whatever. Instead, it seems like what they hypothesize is that there's a social shift. So perhaps it was agriculture that finally made it into the region, like maize and other crops, I assume. And this led to like social hierarchies where, suddenly there's a guy who's like in charge because, he's whatever, he got on top of the social ladder and he controls the agricultural society. And there's a bunch of people under him. And he doesn't want the common hunter running around with a sweet copper knife and stuff. He wants that copper on his chest to say like, hey, I'm the man. And like we see that in Europe too. Like we see that when metal came to the region, it really affected the social hierarchies. But it was different because in the Americas, metal preceded farming, which was completely inverse to Europe, where farming was first and metal came second. So that really might be the reason why not only they stopped mining, but why they never felt the need to, to smelt it or to keep using it or to keep mining, or they didn't seem particularly greedy, really. I don't know.
Ah, I see. Okay. Because, if you're a mobile hunter-gatherer, you don't have time to stay there in that one spot, sitting around the copper ore, making a large-scale society to work on it every day. Whereas in, the old world or later in Mississippian times, you did have the, caloric ability to do that in one sedentary spot, I guess.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
But it's also weird, though, because they did definitely have to get some food surplus to go out to mine copper on an island all summer. That's why this copper culture thing is so interesting, because it's like almost everything that you rationalize in your head, you look at it from a different angle and you're like, wait, that actually doesn't make any sense.
I guess they were just fishing like crazy off the island or something all day.
That's the hypothesis that might be why copper was so useful as compared to stone, is because you could turn it into fishing hooks. You could turn it into, these are called Leicester spears. We find these implements all over in the region. And what you would do is...
I love that you've just had every tool you've talked about sitting in arm's reach.
I was trying to get a dang fish with this all winter, and I couldn't get one. Oh, God, I almost got myself right there. But, yeah, I also caught a fish. I caught a sturgeon on this hook just to prove it that I could do it. And it bent it a little bit. But this isn't even a very big hook, and I caught a 15, 20-pound fish. So it really, put it together in my mind that it was probably fishing that was sustaining these people largely, but there's also bison and elk, and this is in the archaic period too. So there's probably a lot more animals and it's a lot fewer people as well. So yeah.
Interesting. What was that tool called again?
The Leicester spear. I think it's some UK word. I don't really know how to properly pronounce it.
Yeah.
Ask Stefan Milo.
Yeah, I think he had corrected me on it. It's Leicester. In fact, when I was in London, I asked this lady on the subway, like, where's Leicester Square, or how do I get there? And she laughed, and she was like, it's Leicester.
Yeah,
but you just sound like a barbarian. Yeah, Worcestershire sauce, Worcester. Let me think of something else to ask you here. Any other things you learned from I guess I more wanted to ask you, like, what was your thought process of like weaving in these experts into the video? Because I don't know if you've done that too often before, have you?
No, I haven't really done it as much, just because like it's just kind of my workflow and how I put a video together. I don't know how Stefan does it, because it's like, that's such a headache in my head to edit all that and to figure all that out. Like, I'd rather just do the research myself and see what these people have, put out there and then put the video together. But this video, I wanted to go out there, and that's why I was in Michigan for half a week and then in northern Minnesota for another half a week, just hanging out with David, who is, one of the most published people on the old copper culture, I believe, at least in the past decade, I think. And then also there's a lot of amateur archaeologists and people who are really passionate about the old copper culture, and they're really great resources in like recreating the artifacts and just like having ideas about it, like informal or sometimes formal ideas. So I talked to a lot of people who are like, really into it. There's a detectorist community too, which is kind of a weird thing, archaeologists don't want people going around metal detecting and finding all these artifacts.
Yeah.
And that's a weird divide, because I don't know, it is weird because archaeologists themselves do metal detect sites for sure. It's kind of awesome because it's like, you can't metal detect for stone tools, If you could, that would be really cool. You find so many Clovis points, but yeah, metal detecting can be pretty damaging. So don't do it if you're not with an archaeologist. That's what I'd say in the region. Don't go out looking for these artifacts. You might,
or at least if you find something, GPS it and let people know. But yeah, you could also find a burial.
Yeah, I'm saying this actually next weekend. I'm going out with, he's in school to be he's in school to be an archaeologist, but we're going to go out and find artifacts on video. And obviously we're going to mark down their locations. We're not going to tell anybody where they are. And, we're doing it respectfully on private land. So I don't want to be too much of a hypocrite.
Private land, you can basically do whatever. Just take a GPS point and read some notes. Okay. Anything else you'd like people to know about I guess we never defined it. The old copper culture is specifically North American. It doesn't mean old copper culture in the old world, right?
Yeah, no, yeah. It's just in around the Great Lakes, really. It spreads a little bit around the area, but it's mostly just within maybe 100, 200 miles of the shores of the Great Lakes. And it goes all the way, into Canada as well, because Great Lakes. But
sure.
But yeah, it probably wasn't a single, just like Clovis, it probably wasn't a single culture. Like a lot of these people probably couldn't even speak the same language as each other, and they're probably really different. And it existed over 5,000 years. So think of how long of a period that is. That's crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else you'd like people to know about it, or like what's something you wish people would take away from your doc?
I want people to take away basically that Native Americans were using a lot of metal at different points, and just the use of metal is a complex topic, and it doesn't necessarily make one population more advanced than another. The old copper complex is like proof that metal use can be a good thing for a long time, and then we're going to stop using it really, and we're going to switch back to stone tools because they work too. It's not inherently superior, and that there's a lot of mystery still with the old copper complex, and I just hope to make it kind of like a household thing, at least for people who are interested in prehistory to know, because I mean, like I was talking to you about it and you thought it might be like a pseudoscience thing, right?
Yeah. For at least because I saw someone making the connection that like the copper is so fine there or something that they found it in the old world or something.
Yeah. Graham Hancock was spreading in the 90s.
Oh, really?
The Phoenicians had come to the Great Lakes and mined the copper. It was not true. It ended up just being copper that was mined somewhere else in Europe or something. I don't know.
Gotcha.
But okay. I mean, one of the big taglines that I'm going to use for like my TikToks and my tweets about the old copper culture is that they were literally using Native Americans in the Great Lakes region were literally using, metal swords probably over 2,000 or 3,000 years before the Europeans ever made one or held their hands on one. So that's absolutely wild. And also like they were using copper tipped atlatl darts. That was like one of their main weapons for hunting. Seemingly we find these conical points everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just wild to think of these hunter gatherers clad in copper that long ago, while the rest of the world was really using stone tools. So just the pure absurdity of the old copper culture is just something I want to really get out there to change people's perspectives on just prehistory, tool use, and how interesting the history is of the Great Lakes region. You never hear about it really.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end it. Although I do want to say the last time I interviewed you, I forgot to hit record on your video. So apologies to everybody for that. But now we get to see your background skull stuff there. What's your favorite piece of, ancient people you got back there? Yeah.
Let me look. You got to show some love to Dmanisi. Is it number 4, I think? Can't be forgetting that. But the old man of Dmanisi, Georgia, the Homo erectus that they, nurtured until his last days. He doesn't even have teeth in the bottom, really, or the top.
Oh, right.
So, yeah, just shows you that compassion goes back, this is 1.7 million years ago or 1.8 million years ago. So I love Dmanisi 4, all the Dmanisi hominids, whatever they're called. Yeah, I'd say that's probably my favorite.
Hell yeah, man. Well, thanks for coming on. I'm going to encourage people to go watch your video. What will it be titled? Do you know? I guess you'll play around with the title so far.
Right now, it's just called Documentary Old Copper Culture on my Google Docs, but it'll be like
there you go. But
America's 10,000-year-old mystery, or was this the world's first metal age, or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, you're good at those titles. Yeah, so I encourage you guys to go click on that. I'll link it here, put it in the description. Also, as well, you have that short film TV show thing working on there. Where can people donate to that?
That we don't have the fundraiser out yet. That will probably be, I don't know, October, maybe sooner. I'm still trying to get that 100,000 from Artlist, try to win that competition. We don't know how it's going to play out. There's a lot of moving parts still. So just be on the lookout. We might do a short film series. We will do one.
Okay. And then people can follow you, North02, on most platforms?
Yeah, everything.
Cool. Okay, man. Well, this was really awesome. I learned more than I ever knew about copper culture.
Yeah, so you for 50 minutes now. So
yeah. Oh, so one last thing. Where are some places people can read more on this? That's probably a good question.
David Pompiani has a book titled Great Water. Go check it out.
It's a crazy cover.
Good book.
Nice.
Can you read it? I don't know if it's in verse or not, but
it's a good book.
And it explains everything I just said, even in more detail. And go check him out. He's a good researcher and author.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, happy to have you back on anytime. Talk about another fixation.
Thanks for letting me yap.
Yeah, of course, man. It's just the Yap podcast and sometimes about dogs. Rate and review the podcast, please, on Spotify, Apple. And if you haven't hit the like video on YouTube, hit the like video, leave a comment. And if you have questions for North, as he's holding that really awesome sword, you can put them here in the comments because I'm sure he'll be back on and you can ask more questions. And I think with that, we're out.
Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.